Hi, I'm Georgie Dickens, host of Stratospheric Leaders, the podcast where I get to have inspired conversations with extraordinary leaders from across capital markets. Join me to hear their game-changing strategies, the personal stories and powerful sound bites behind their stratospheric success. Every episode packed with wisdom, insight and real-world lessons, the stuff they simply don't teach you in business school. If you want to elevate your game and most importantly, those around you, this podcast is for you. Enjoy. Troy, I am delighted to welcome you to an episode of Stratospheric Leaders. And I know just from the initial conversation that we've had that this is going to be a really enjoyable and insightful conversation. And before we get to hear your leadership kernels, I would love for the audience to get a sense of who you are when you're not in the seat that you sit in. So let's just rewind back to when you were a child. What did you dream of becoming growing up?
Growing up, you change career, paths a little bit, like, fireman, policeman, like when you're younger. But actually the first kind of real career path that I kind of thought I wanted to go into was politics. I remember when I was young, I used to say I wanted to be the next mayor of Chicago. This was like 7th, 8th grade. I was very fascinated with, living in Chicago with Chicago politics and just politics in general. And, would read the news and, was fascinated with the elections and everything. So I thought that I would one day run for public office.
How do you feel about that now? Still on the bucket list of things to do?
Throughout my career, I've realized it's actually better to influence politicians than to be a politician, actually. But, I wouldn't rule it out completely. I do like public service a lot. I think that there's a lot to give back to the community. And I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in government today. There's a lot of, services and policies that I think we need to craft for our future generations. And right now I'm doing that in finance, but I would love to maybe one day be able to do that in other areas.
You just said the word influence a second ago, and I think there are so many skills and qualities that are transferable. They transcend sectors. When you think about influence, what do you think makes somebody a good influencer, given the fact that it's quite an important quality to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one, you have to be very engaging. You have to have a lot of interpersonal skills to be able to represent an argument, good debate skills. You can't just shut people down. You have to be able to hear them out and you have to be able to understand their perspective. At the same time, you have to be able to articulate how you're seeing things and why you think that they should believe what you believe. It shouldn't just be one-sided all the time. And I think that throughout my career, I've seen a lot of evolution of financial markets. And in some of my roles, I've had to advocate for some change in those markets. And how I've done that is through presenting a lot of evidence and research and how I have articulated that back to, those exchanges in those financial markets, but also hearing back from them about how, they see things and from their other clients' perspectives. There's a lot of perspective out there. I think it's very important to hear it all out before you start to make decisions on it.
So they're listening. I hear, you said, listen, hear the person out. And I be that strong voice. And you said evidence your argument. I think so often when we listen to people, like it's headlines, but they don't substantiate. So it's like root your argument, your debate, like root it in data, root it in evidence.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to have like 100% hard evidence all the time, but you should have some foundation of how you've come to your understanding of why you're advocating or trying to present a certain argument against or for something. You shouldn't just say it because. You should say it because of this, or because I read this, or research has shown this. It stands more ground and it has a lot more resonating effect with people when you can back it up with some data or some research.
Yeah, I think I need you to have a conversation with my children. Recently, one of my sons was like, I need to have more pocket money because I should have more pocket money. I'm thinking that's not rooted in a strong enough case.
Yeah. I would say to my son, put a business plan on what you would do with that pocket money and then we'll talk.
Yes, I think that's because again, it encourages them to be thoughtful, to be strategic. How are they going to spend, invest? And when we think about children, you grew up, and I've understand from our conversation, you were surrounded by trailblazing women. So not just women, trailblazing women. And I think it's really important to underscore that word trailblazing. How did they influence you? We can go back to that word influence.
Yeah, I mean, they were, very significant influences in my life. My mother, actually, and my aunts. So my Aunt Mary Claire, my mom's sister, was one of the first women on the trading floors of the Chicago Board of Trade. And, she helped kind of trailblaze a lot of the women that came down to the floors, beyond her, including my mom, who was the youngest in her family. And when she got down there, she had to really fight with a lot of grit to really make a career for herself. And I'm very proud of the business that she built. She built the clearing services business, and she brought in a lot of her sisters and her cousins, who were all women, to operate that business. And it ran for 17 years before she sold it to FC Stone.
Wow. So grit. And so is that something you identify with yourself?
I do, yes. And I learned that from my mother.
Yeah, there's a great book, I think Angela Duckworth talks about grit being one of and I think especially in today's world, and I say this to my children, I was like, it was school, there can be a lot of participation medals. I'm like, the world out there, you don't get an award or a job for, just showing up. You got to do the work, you got to hustle.
Yeah. I mean, that I also learned that from my father as well. But I think with women, there had to be a little bit of an extra kind of ambition and work ethic to be able to make it in finance. And I was very proud of my mom and women in my family who were able to do that. And then, paved the path for myself. I came down to the trading floors when I was 14 because of my mom and the business that she built working for her clients.
Okay, tell us about that. Age 14 on the floor. Like, I'm curious, the first day you stepped onto the floor, talk us through that. How did it feel? Yeah. Like, what was happening to your senses?
It was a privilege that, unfortunately doesn't exist anymore because trading floors don't really exist much anymore. But it was the day after I graduated 8th grade and, went down, took my test to get on the floor because you had to take a test to get access to the trading floors, and was a clerk, a runner. And one of the gentlemen that I was clerking for was a very tall man, and he gave me one of his old trading jackets that literally went down to my knees. And so I'm like this 14-year-old boy, still going through puberty and growing and have this really oversized jacket on me on the floor. And, you have a lot of masculinity on the trading floors as well, because you have to be loud and strong and you have to get your voices heard in those trading pits back in the day. And so it was very intimidating, but it really helped me break out of my shell. I was very introverted before I started working on the trading floors, and it's hard to not describe me as an extroverted person.
And intimidating, I think many people will be able to relate to taking on new opportunities, expanded responsibilities, moving jobs. You've been SIBO, Citadel. There can be many, many times in our life where we can experience intimidation to varying degrees. What's your relationship with feeling that kind of intimidation? And when you were age 14, like how did you get past it?
You have to kind of go deep and kind of find the strength and kind of, the resiliency to be able to come back onto the trading floors every day. There's actually a story that I like to tell where it was, very busy on the floor one day. One of the phone brokers was trying to get my attention, and I didn't hear him, and he threw the phone in my head. And I don't think he intended it to hit me. It was more just to grab my attention, but it hit me in the head. And, that was just the atmosphere. And, that can be, very humiliating and embarrassing at the same time. But I just took it as a product of the atmosphere. I didn't really let it bring me down. And then the funny thing is, when he found out who my mom was, he kind of really apologized about it. But, it was helpful that I was able to come into the business with a strong family name, with a lot of history. And, I had to make my own way, but I at least got a good jump start. And I didn't take that for granted. I made sure to really, take the most of it, and, spent every summer at high school working on the trading floors, learning the business from the ground up. Actually wasn't something that I thought that I was going to stick with. Originally, I thought I might go into sports medicine or something that was, kind of sports adjacent, because I was really getting into sports in high school. But towards my senior year, I really kind of, like a light bulb went off, saw that this was, a fascinating industry, one that I thought that I could do very well in. I was very good in math. It was very math centric. I knew that I could get some scholarship money through working at the exchange. And so that was the path that I decided to take very late in my senior year of high school, actually.
You had a very interesting and distinguished career and a successful career in capital markets. And you used the word proud a little while ago. And I wonder, when you reflect on your time, to date in the industry, and we're going to come to in-play in a minute, which is, your current role, and that's on the sports side. So it's interesting how, that love, potentially going to sports medicine, that love of sports was already there at an early age. But when you look back at your career, what are you most proud of, and why?
That's also a great question. I'm proud of the fact that most of my career has been through modernizing our financial markets. When I started in the industry, most of the markets were traded, at least in futures and in derivatives, were on a trading floor. And that was right when electronic trading really started to captivate the industry. I remember being at a Thanksgiving and my uncles telling me that there was no way that open outcry could be replaced by computers, that humans could do it better. I knew, being on the border of a millennial, that yes, computers could do it better than humans. And, from that point on, started to anchor my career to anything that associated with modernizing, electronifying of the market. And, was actually given an opportunity to go to Frankfurt, Germany, and work with Eurex, who was one of the first futures exchanges to pioneer electronic trading, and learn trading system development from them, and then came back to the US and helped the Chicago Board of Trade build their first trading systems. And so, for the first half of my career was, transforming away from an open outcry model into first a hybrid, electronic open outcry model. And then now today, the majority of the futures markets are traded electronically, as are most asset classes today.
It's the open outcry. I remember as a student, I was at Reuters back in 99, 2000, and we went to the LME and watched the open outcry. And it was extraordinary. You talked about the jackets that you age 14, someone gave you a jacket that went down to your knees. I was just intrigued by, different colored jackets and just the speed and the hand signals and the chaos. And I'm like, how does anyone know what's getting done? But clearly a methodology and a system that worked. And then I part of my career, I was at ICAP and I was on the interest rate swap side. So that was all about the electronification of swaps. Mm-hmm. And so that modernizing, I hear you. There have been many asset classes that have been modernized. And the word that really came up for me listening to you is, that being a pioneer. And I'd love to hear a little bit around the role that you're, the company in play, because that pioneer, that modernizing, that transformation, that ability to see an unmet future feels that that's very intrinsically linked to what you're doing now. So I'd love to get a sense of the pathway from the capital markets to what you're doing now. And then I'll pause there because I've got many more questions, but let's just start there.
Yeah, no. So I'm very proud to talk about In-Play Global, which is my current, where I am currently. So I'm the president and COO of In-Play Global, which is going to be the first exchange or marketplace for trading securitized sports performance. And when I chose to take this role, what really drove me to it was there's not a lot of new opportunities to innovate in financial markets today. We saw a lot of it through crypto, maybe 8-10 years ago, but we really haven't seen much since then. And so we now have seen kind of the growth of prediction markets and how sports have kind of grown around prediction markets, sports performance specifically. And when the founder of In-Play Global came to me and presented the opportunity, I knew I had to, come into this company and help build this, because it's very rare, in 2025 to find an opportunity like this where you get to build something from the ground up that's truly innovative and something that hasn't been done before. And so next year we'll be launching sports performance securities, which will allow investors to buy equities on individual team companies that track performance of sports.
And which sports are you going to start with? I mean, is there a favorite, or is it?
Well, there are definitely favorites. We want to do all the majors and some colleges, but we would like to launch with the World Cup next summer. It's a big global tournament, and it's being played in North America. So we see it as a phenomenal opportunity to make that our launch event. That will take us into the fall, which is football season. So then we'll start to securitize professional football and college football teams. And then that will take us into professional basketball and hockey.
And between now and then, to make the ambition a reality, what are the key things that need to happen? So, when we get to the World Cup, like everything you've spoken about is living and breathing and being, you've executed on.
Yeah. So the first thing we had to do was we had to pick a technology partner, which we recently did. We selected a company or an exchange group called MEMX, the Members Exchange, which has a great track record in building not only their own technology, but the technology for other ATSs, an alternative trading system, which is what we will become. And they've already started to write the requirements and begin the build for that so that we can launch that early next year and start to get it tested and rolled out for the retail brokers and market makers to start developing too. Then we have to start educating investors on what are performance securities and why these are different than other stocks or other products out there that they might be trading around sports performance. And so that's going to take a lot of media campaigns and educational, marketing collateral that we need to publish, as well as going out and doing conferences and doing some webinars just to explain and help investors understand the concept holistically, so that when we launch and bring these securities to market, there's a very succinct understanding of how these trade so that investors can have success right out the gates.
And at the beginning, we were talking about the importance of being able to influence, to listen, to be able to debate. It feels like they're kind of really going to be, they're important skills in this part of the journey.
Absolutely. It's really important in education in general. You want to be able to deliver key information with a foundation that resonates with all investors or all people in general, so that they retain that information and then they can utilize that information in a productive way. In the case of investing, we see that our performance securities can be a platform for enhanced financial literacy. We can use these securities to teach the next generation of investors how to trade the stock market through something that they're passionate about, which is sports. How sports and team perform is no differently than how a company should perform. It's based on futures earnings. Teams are performing on or projected wins, how they're going to achieve their performance throughout the whole season. Will they make it to the playoffs? Will they make it to the championships? Actually, I feel like younger generations actually know about how to analyze a sports team than they know how to analyze a stock or a publicly traded company. So we have now the ability to converge the two and bring all of that together and help elevate and empower investors to not only trade securities around sports performance, but also securities around publicly traded companies.
And you mentioned you're building from the ground up, and what you're doing is truly innovative. What's one thing no one warned you about when it comes to building something from the ground up?
There's a lot of little things that you don't realize when you have to build a company. So it's not just a new product class. We're building a full new company from the ground up. And so we're a startup in its purest form. Like, we have to staff every key function from finance to HR to technology and operations. And that's in addition to also developing the product itself and getting that educated and distributed and understood and then launched successfully. And so there's just a lot of little things that add up that you have to keep track of. And so you have to be very detail oriented. You have to understand all of the dependencies that go into not only launching a company from scratch, but also launching a whole new asset class. And so those are the things that they don't always tell you in the interview process when you go for jobs like this. But I'm actually learning a lot, and it's been an awesome experience so far.
And so it's as you said, understanding all the dependencies. It's all those little things that collectively there's a lot to make sure that you're managing. And when you think about your own style, your leadership style, what do you think makes you uniquely positioned to drive this company forward and create the success that you're kind of seeking?
That's a really great question. For one, I don't want to be the smartest one in the room. I want to surround myself with the subject matter experts of all of the areas that I need to make this company successful and to make this product successful. And so bringing in the right talent is the first step in key leadership and being a good leader. And then listening to those leaders that I bring in and understanding and what they can achieve, and then empowering them to achieve it. I'm not a micromanager in any regard. I want to give, my leaders, the team that reports into me, the ability to go execute on their plans once those plans have been approved. I want to be able to give them the resources and support that they need to be able to achieve success. And then when they have failures or they have missteps, I want to give them constructive feedback and support them as they recover from those failures and learn from those failures so that we don't make them.
It's interesting feedback, because it's feedback is the gift that is already given, but especially in a growth company, like it's iteration, isn't it? There'll be things that work, things that don't work, but that constant feedback loop. And it made me think, what's the worst piece of feedback you've ever received about yourself?
About myself?
Yeah. Although maybe not the worst, but the one that you kind of like, we have a visceral reaction to.
Yeah. So earlier in my career, I was often referred to as more tactical than strategic, which isn't necessarily seen as a deficiency or like as a bad thing, but as you want to grow and you want to be a leader, you want to be seen as both tactical and strategic. Tactical is very important because that's how you get things done. That's how you execute on the strategies. But, I didn't like hearing that I wasn't strategic or that I didn't have a strategic mindset. And I think it was also part of my age, because I've often been the youngest person in the room at the levels that I've achieved in my career. And so I often am seated at the table with people 10, 15, 20 years older than me. And they see me as this young guy who doesn't have the experience or expertise that maybe they do. And so they equate that to a strategic mindset. And so I've definitely, over the years, tried to amplify that more and more and tried to express more opinion and strategic perspective and not just be, tactical. It's great that I am seen as that because that's what's going to get the job done. But what makes a really good leader is you also have to be strategic and forward thinking, and you have to anticipate, like a game of chess, 2 to 3 steps ahead of where you want to be.
It's interesting, that people, we're all highly judgmental. We're human beings. And if you have a heartbeat, we are judgmental, sometimes consciously, other times unconsciously. And you mentioned there the fact that you are, often, at these tables and you are the youngest person. And people can make a perception of that age brings wisdom and more insight. And how have you dealt with that perception of, he's the youngest, he's more tactical, therefore he's less strategic? Yeah. Is it, you said, I've expressed my opinions more, like, what have you done to me? Or have you done anything? How have you managed that?
I mean, I often try to prove people wrong and deliver what I say I'm going to deliver. One of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten in my life was from my dad, who said, under promise and over deliver. And that is exactly what I try to do. And, I try to never set expectations too high that I know are not achievable or that I can't deliver on. I'm a man of my word. I try to deliver on what I say I'm going to deliver on. And if I can show results, then that usually shows that I can be both tactical and strategic at the same time.
Makes me think of the bond market, where it's like, my word is my bond. Like there's a like, the handshake of, I realize I'm a bit of a people pleaser. So I overpromise, which is clearly not a good tactic. You mentioned that you want to surround yourself and, with the smarter people. And I think, we are who we surround ourselves, the people we most surround ourselves with. And I remember a CEO I worked with said, look, I want to be an inch of an expert on every area of the business, but I'm not the expert because I've employed like a CRO, a CHRO, a CIO, a CFO, like, they are the expert, but I want to be that inch of an expert. And getting talent, making those choices on talent, getting it right is really important, because if you get it wrong, it can be costly. How do you make sure, like in that interview process or in that selection process, how do you do the best you can at making sure you're getting the right fit for in-play?
So right now, because we are still small, it's good to have, a few people interview key candidates that we're bringing in, from our CEO and founder to our chief legal officer, strategic advisors that we brought in, so that it's not just my opinion on whether or not these resources are going to be the best fit for in-play, but it's a collective agreement that they're not only a fit for what we need, but a cultural fit for the company that we want to build. And I think that's absolutely important, because you can have really capable people that come in that can execute on their job and their discipline, but if they're not a good cultural fit and they're not going to be collaborative and work well on a team, which is very important to me, then they're not going to be a fit for a startup like in-play.
Yeah, it's such a valuable point to underscore the importance of cultural fit, because people can be capable, they can be highly capable, but if they're toxic, if they're not if they're not collaborative, like that stuff can be very cancerous to an organization. And I think when you see companies get it wrong, it's where they hire purely for capability and they're not thinking, how does that person fit into the culture of the organization? You mentioned, strategic advisors. I'm curious, do you have your own internal board of directors?
Yes, I do. Yes. I'm very pro mentorship in general, and I've been a mentor for many years, and I have a lot of great mentors in my life and have from a very young age. There are very many decisions I make in my life without consulting at least one or two mentors of mine. Sometimes it's my parents, sometimes it's professionals that are both friends and mentors. But I have my own, set of board of directors that have guided me, these last 30 years.
It's interesting. When I was early in my career, I looked at senior leaders in the industry, and I just assumed that when you get to the C-suite, you've figured it all out, and you couldn't possibly need any advice. And you realize over time that however senior you are, it's always good to have sounding boards, to have people who can be the mirror, to have different perspectives. Because sometimes when you're, and a client referred to this recently, he said, there's sometimes you need to be the seaplane, other times the surfer, sometimes the snorkeler, sometimes the scuba diver. And sometimes we can be the scuba diver, and actually we need to lift ourselves up to get that perspective. And sometimes we can't do it ourselves because we're in it, which is where others can help lift us and see the things we might be missing.
Exactly. And maybe they've been there that you haven't, maybe they know where, the landmines are, they have a different approach. And, it's great to also have kind of, mentors or advisors at different stages in their careers too. I get mentorship from people younger than me in early stages of their career. And I've learned a lot from them. I've learned about what the next generation wants from a leader. I've learned what type of tools they want to utilize in the workplace, what type of culture they want in the workplace. And that's important for me to understand if I'm trying to build a very cohesive, collegiate, atmosphere that, drives productivity and excitement in what we're building.
Yeah. That reverse mentoring is really important. As you shared, what does the next generation want? We don't know what we don't know. And I look certainly at my children, they have completely different ways of doing things. And it's not necessarily to impose our way on them. It's that openness, that receptiveness to seeing things differently. When you think about your career, what has been an Achilles heel of yours, something you've had to work on?
I think it's probably the same for many people when you reach a certain point, or maybe when you even start out your career, and that's patience. You always want things to happen faster than they can or should. You always want to accelerate things maybe before they should be accelerated, to get to the results quicker. Sometimes that's not the right solution or that's the right approach. Sometimes things need to take a certain amount of time to be done with a certain amount of quality. And so, or you just have to just sit tight and wait for certain decisions to be made on the other side of the table. So I would say sometimes patience is my Achilles tendon.
Yeah, it's the word impatience as well means I'm patient. Like I am patient. Like it's and I remember someone once said to me, it's exercise patient urgency. So it's patient urgency is like, yes, it can still be an acceleration, wanting to get things done, but also recognizing things take time.
Exactly.
And leadership requires many trade-offs. I mean, it does. Like we can't do it all. What have been some of the, I suppose, sacrifices you've made for your career?
I think the biggest sacrifice is just time with family. Different stages of my career have, added a lot of working hours, sometimes 60, 70-hour weeks, a lot of travel. In my career, I've been very fortunate to have opportunities where I've got to travel all over the world, and that takes me away from my family. And so I may miss sporting events with my son, who's now 10, or, birthdays or, special occasions from time to time, or just quality time with family. And I would say that's probably been the biggest sacrifice for me.
And how do you manage that mentally? I.e., you're missing your son's sports events. So there isn't, like, I don't know if the word's guilt or like, again, it's just, I'm missing it, but without any kind of emotion attached to it. Or maybe there isn't any emotion attached. I'm just wondering how you manage it.
I think it's situational. I think we're very fortunate today that we have more access to resources that allows us to be there without being there, like FaceTime or video chat. So, I'm fortunate that, I can be on video or FaceTime with my son when I'm traveling and, talk to him in the mornings before he goes to school or when he gets home from school and, at least be present where I can via video. And that's the best that I can achieve, which wasn't even possible, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. So we're very fortunate, and it's just leveraging those resources to at least, make the best of the situation, to be as present as I could possibly be. And then when I am home, trying to make the most quality time that I can.
You talk about quality of time and present, which makes me think of presence. Our quality of presence is really important, especially when you're speaking with investors, with your advisors, as a leader, when you're showing up in front of your company. And I think how we start our day strongly influences how we show up. What does your morning look like when you wake up? Like, what does your morning routine look like?
Yeah, so very strong cup of coffee every morning. Like extremely strong, like a couple shots of espresso with my coffee usually in the morning. Usually gets my brain going, gets the juices flowing. I'm very organized. So usually for me, it's looking at my schedule for the day, making sure I understand what I need to achieve that day. What are the meetings that I have? When you get into more senior leadership roles, you're going to be juggling a lot of different things throughout the day. You're not just focused on one task or one, set of operations. You could be dealing with a whole hodgepodge of things. And so it's good to understand, okay, how does my day lay out? And so I usually start, my day looking at my calendar. I don't really rely on an assistant or anyone to kind of keep my calendar for me. I'm very OCD that way. I want to know who I'm meeting with, why I'm meeting with them. I want to understand the purpose of those meetings before I go into those meetings so that I'm prepared. And then it allows me to use my time wisely.
Yeah, I think understanding the purpose of meetings is so you can exercise that discernment. I think there's many leaders that I know that their diary isn't their own. People can go in and just book time that's already allocated to other things. And but you want to make sure that your time is being invested in where it has its highest value.
Yes, exactly. You want to make sure it's the good use of your time. You want to make sure that you're delegating your time where it should be delegated and you show up where it's needed. And I think that's important with leadership as well. You have to be able to delegate. You shouldn't feel like you need to be everywhere. You can't be everywhere. One, you'll exhaust yourself and you'll degrade the quality of the output that you give. And it's not fair to your team that you're always there. You have to be able to allow them to function on their own.
And look, with the senior leadership seat, stress is part of the journey. Like, it would be wonderful if things were stress-free, but how do you mitigate the stress that comes with the territory?
A big milkshake at the end of the day. And I'm not joking when I say that.
What goes into the milkshake then? Like, is this like special mushrooms or is it?
No, I'm a big sugar person, but my favorite food is ice cream. And if I'm really having a rough day and I need some comfort food, I'll just put some ice cream in a blender and make a milkshake. And that usually kind of lowers the stress levels a little bit for me. And then exercising as well. I think that's a great way to get out, some frustration or kind of rebalance you a little bit or get your mind off of work for, an hour or so if you can, a few days a week.
And we all need that outlet. And, when you look back now to the 14-year-old you that was on the trading floor, what's one thing you go back and tell that younger self?
You're stronger than you think.
Speak more to that.
I would go back to my 14-year-old self and, you're not the geeky, introverted, 8th grader. You are at that point in time. You're stronger than you think, and there's nothing you can't do if you put your mind to it.
And so saying that, where have you surprised yourself most in your career?
I mean, I think when I went to Citadel Securities, that was probably one of the more challenging career moves for me. I mean, that was an atmosphere that, is running 100 miles an hour and you have to keep up and you have to learn a lot of new things very quickly. And I think I really stepped up and kind of took on that challenge and put in the hours and put in the effort to learn, a lot of new asset classes that I had not been exposed to before and learn all the things that Citadel was doing, not just in the US, but globally. And, it allowed me to have a 6-year career there. And I was very fortunate for that.
And you've got to do the work, isn't it? Like, hard work is a minimum. You're kind of saying there, I put in the effort to learn, and it's being a voracious learner, I think, as well. Like, every day is a school day.
Yeah. Another great piece of advice I got from my dad as I was growing up is never stop learning. And, I saw it from him, not just in the advice, but he lives it. Like, he's constantly learning through his career, through life. Like, both my parents are, but he was just such a great example of never stop learning. And that's the same advice that I give to my son and to anyone that I mentor, because there's always going to be new stuff to learn. And if you stop learning, then you're going to get complacent. And if you get complacent, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, never get complacent. And I think it can sometimes be easy. We don't realize, which is where, we need the truth tellers around us to tell us, you're getting complacent, like, sort it out. And look, when you think ahead, what does success look like for InPlay in the go forward? And so there's two parts to this question. What does success look like for InPlay, and what does success look like for you as well, personally?
Success for InPlay for us would be, we launch in 2026, and by the end of 2027, we're a brand name. Everyone knows who we are. A lot of investors are trading our securities, both retail and institutional. We're scaling, into more sports globally, not just, in the US. And, we become a real asset class that's traded along all the other asset classes in the financial world. And then for success for me is, leading that success, I think, is the success that I want to achieve personally, and seeing the team reach that success.
And you've mentioned your parents, you've mentioned your son. Like, what is one thing you'd love to see in your son that means he's a chip off the old block?
Good work ethic.
Good work.
Never giving up. And I don't see that yet. So he's very determined and has a very ingenuitive mind and likes to know how things work. And I love sitting down and building Legos with him and just kind of answering. Non-stop questions all day long. Like, why, this, and, very inquisitive. And I love that. And I hope that never dies with him.
And that childlike wonder, that quizzical why, like, it's children always are seeking to understand. Like, there's that curiosity by nature. And the fact you're doing your Lego, like, that's building. He's already, chip off the old block and building. And your parents, when they look at the person that you've become, what do you think they're most proud of?
I think they're proud of, my integrity, the person that I've maintained over the years. Like, you can get lost in this industry very easily. Like, you get swept away with, the success, the money, the fame, whatever comes with it, depending on the levels that you reach. I've never compromised my core values. I've always tried to, be a man of integrity, be a person of integrity, lead with integrity, and never compromise. Yeah. I think that's what they would be the most proud of.
Well, look, this has been incredibly insightful, interesting. I've had a big smile on my face listening to you, hearing from you. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you a huge amount of success. I wish In Play a huge amount of success. And I look forward to that ambition that you've really spoken to. I look forward to reading all about it and that being realized.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.